We're taking a closer look at developments in the South Pacific today, specifically the Solomon Islands. It is planning a security deal with China, and the idea of Chinese warships based less than 2,000 kilometers off the Australian coast, off its northeast, has set alarm bells ringing. In fact, even the United States is worried. The White House has plans to send its top Asia official, Kurt Campbell, to the small nation later this month.
The ongoing battle for influence between China and the West is shifting to the South Pacific. Beijing is upping its presence. A draft agreement would allow Chinese police and soldiers to patrol the Solomon Islands. The Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, Britain, Canada, Australia and New Zealand, fears China is eyeing a naval base there. The Solomons have long been seen as Australia's backyard. The archipelago is a long way from China, but it's just a 3-hour flight from Brisbane. Australian and New Zealand leaders are not happy.
The reports that we've seen are not a surprise to us and a reminder of the constant pressure and threats that present in our region to our own national security.
Look, New Zealand has long expressed an opinion that we do not want to see the militarisation of the Pacific, that we believe we can support one another with defence and security needs as they arise, and New Zealand has a history of doing that in the Solomon Islands.
Building here.
Solomon Islands switched diplomatic ties from Taiwan to Beijing in 2019, which partly fueled discontent that led to riots in the capital, Honiara, in November last year. Chinese businesses were attacked in the unrest. Solomon Islands Prime Minister Manasseh Sogavare dismisses critics of the treaty with China as lunatics disrespectful of the island's sovereignty.
We have no intention, Mr. Speaker, of pitching into any geopolitical power struggle. To suggest it, Mr. Speaker, is simply ludicrous. As a sovereign country, Mr. Speaker, we will continue to collaborate to ensure that what Solomon Islands needs in its security space are addressed collectively with our development partners.
China wants to build a blue water navy capable of projecting power around the world. To make this work, it needs bases from which to service a strike force. China tries to play down fears it wants to expand in the region and blames Australia for promoting US-led competition. As two independent and sovereign countries, China and Solomon Islands can carry out normal law enforcement and security cooperation on the basis of equal treatment and mutual benefit. The West has been stunned by the speed with which China has moved to militarize the man-made islands in the South China Sea. A move to Solomon Islands increases the risk of escalation and potential conflict.
Joining us in the studio is DW's Clifford Coonan. Clifford, tell us more about this proposed security deal. I thought Australia had some kind of relationship with the Solomon Islands.
It does. It already has a security deal, and it also has a very complicated and intertwined relationship with the Solomon Islands. As we mentioned in the report, it's a 2-hour flight from Brisbane. And the South Pacific is seen very much as Australia's backyard, its sphere of influence. And it gives $1.3 billion every year in development aid, and it has various other security guarantees. When there was unrest there in November last year, they sent security forces there to shore up the unrest. So they do have this very complicated relationship, but it's also a difficult balancing act in many ways for Australia, as we can see in a quote here from Scott Morrison.
As a friend of Solomon Islands, we remain their first call for security. We remain the first call when it comes to the issues that concern them right across their development aid. The suggestion that somehow some seem to be making that Solomon Islands is somehow under the control of Australia, I think is offensive to the Solomon Islands. They are a sovereign nation. I respect their independence, and they will make their own decisions about their own sovereignty. What we have been doing is ensuring that they are fully aware of the risks and the security matters that are not only of concern to Australia, but islands, Pacific nations across the Pacific.
So I think there, what that comment shows that if you look at it from the Solomon Islands perspective, you know, they're 151st in the 189 countries on the UN Human Development Index. So it's a poor country. It needs Australia's help, but then China can also offer economic guarantees as well as security guarantees.
So it's a very vulnerable country with a lot of needs. I think a lot of people in Asia are probably looking at the situation and wondering the parallel with the South China Seas, because this potential security agreement can quickly turn into a very permanent military installation. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, China wants to establish itself as the premier power broker in the Indo-Pacific, and it's done this through various means, through trying to broker deals with various countries, usually economic guarantees. In some ways, Solomon Islands is unusual because it's a straightforward security guarantee, which is something that we've seen in Djibouti in Africa before, but we haven't really seen it so much in the region near to China. So it does have a lot of parallels there. We've seen how China has militarized these 3 islands, which are near the Philippines, which has led recently to the Philippines talking to Japan. All these countries, all of China's neighbors basically have some kind of territorial dispute with China because of China's efforts to expand its influence. So there are parallels with that, and I think we're going to see more and more of that as things go on.
Now, Australia is part of the Quad, together with the United States, India, Japan, and you also recently have had the agreement between Australia, the UK, and the US in terms of providing nuclear-powered submarines. So China can sort of say, hey, this is encirclement, it feels like it, and we have the right to engage with the Solomon Islands if we want to.
Well, China generally says, whenever this comes up, it says that it's only doing what the US has done before, that its sphere of influence is pretty much where it decides. The Solomon Islands is a long way away from China. Now, you can see it as an extension because it's in the Pacific area, and China wants to basically control the Pacific. So encirclement is one argument, but in reality, this is more just about trying to control the Pacific. And it's interesting, Mark Milley, the Joint Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he said recently that China is trying to break the established system of rule of law. And one of the areas that he focused particularly on was the Navy. And I think watching the sort of China's efforts to control the marine, they're developing, a lot of their technological advances are focused on naval vessels. For example, they're going to have a new aircraft carrier which launches by catapult, and they're also trying to develop an aircraft carrier that's a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. So there's a lot of technological advancement, there's a lot of defence spending going into controlling the Navy, and that, I think, you know, shows just how focused China is on the South China Sea and the whole Pacific.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the maps, the Solomon Islands are so far away from China. So really quickly, I mean, ratcheting up of tensions in the Pacific, huh?
I think so. I think that's what we're looking at now. For now, there's just going to be a succession of these sort of deals being struck. There's a lot of small countries in the area, a lot of small island states, a lot of them with very great strategic importance. So certainly more tensions in the Asia-Pacific.
Clifford Coonan, thank you so much, as always, for joining us.